Alright, so hello one and all, welcome back to another Mushoku Tensei episode review where I'll be going over the anime, the manga, and the light novel and covering everything that they skipped because they skipped a lot. I mean, Mushoku Tensei is a big series, so of course things will have to make the cutting block, but we will be picking up those pieces of the block, I guess? What's that phrase about? So let's just jump into this, starting with the anime at episode 6, A Day Off in Roa. The episode starts off with Rudeus and Philip talking as Rudeus apologizes about the kidnapping from the previous day, and he wonders why they wanted to kidnap him, and apparently the Grey Rats are politically and physically worth the risk. And it's been officially recorded that Ghislaine was the one that stopped all the goons while Eris and Rudeus were just helpless children. That's not only to show the power of Ghislaine, but the Grey Rat family. It would also be bad for other Grey Rats to know about Rudeus. And then we meet Hilda, Philip's wife and Eris's mother, and Rudeus's eyes make a beeline straight for her badonkadoos, and he wonders why she just hates him for some reason. But we're also introduced to Soros Boreas Grey Rat, who was already introduced in the light novel in manga as the first person that Rudeus met while arriving at the manor. But Soros thanks Rudeus for saving Eris, but Rudeus says that Ghislaine did all the work. But then Soros gets angry and goes, "Are you lying to me?" But then Rudeus is like, "Oh god, no, Philip is the one who said like that officially Ghislaine did all this. We didn't do a thing." But then Soros gets mad and just punches Philip across the room, and you can kind of see where Eris gets that from. Soros then asks Rudeus to teach Eris magic because she can't get it out of her head. In response, Rudeus says that she should be the one to ask him herself if she really wants it, because if she doesn't, she'll grow up spoiled. Soros then yells loud enough to shake the entire room to get Eris. She comes in and he tells her to ask Rudeus herself. Eris then grabs the sides of her hair and then puts them into twin tails, sticks her hips out, and with a wink and a meow, she asks Rudeus to teach her magic. But apparently, the Boreas Grey Rats are really fond of beast folk, and this is their way of imitating them. But anyway, in the opening shot, we get a montage of Rudeus' new life. At the dinner table, he's to wait alongside the butler and Ghislaine, who's drooling over the food. We see Eris and Rudeus sword fighting, and they seem to be equal in skill. And then we see Eris recite an incantation. "Let the great protection of fire be on the place thou seekest. I call the blood heat of a torch here and now. Fireball!" However, Ghislaine appears to try and do it without an incantation, but fails. However, when Eris does it, she jumps up and down in excitement, and then we see Rudeus sculpt the finishing touches of his 2-in-1 Roxy figure. And then we see Rudeus teach Ghislaine math with a chart. We have the Roman numerals 1, 5, 10, 50, 100, 500, and 1000 written on it. The way it works is like this. You have the columns with the indicated values, and you place down stones for each much of value you want in each row, with a maximum of 5 stones per row. And the board is split up with the left side being the first number in an equation and on the right side being the second number. As you can see, in the one column on the left there are 3 stones, which equal 3. Up above, there's the 1 stone in the 50 column, meaning that it represents 50. Add these together and you get 53. That is the first number in the equation. On the right side, we have the stone on 10, 5, and 1 rows, meaning that the total is 16. And so the board is currently displaying 53 and 16. You can either add or subtract from here. If you want to add numbers together, you move the stones from the right column to the left column. Using this example, if we added these together, the board would end up with, in the left column, a stone on the 50, 10, 5, and 4 on the 1, with an answer of 69. If we wanted to subtract, we'd move it left to right, and the answer would be whatever is remaining in the left column. The board would end up like this. 3 stones in the 10, 1 in the 5, and 2 in the 1, with an answer of 36. I hope I explained that well. Despite how complex this may seem, I actually tried it in person and it's not bad. Obviously it's a bit slower than doing actual math, but it is very nice to like have things visualized. But Ghislaine is pretty excited about learning math, which is weird, but Eris is too busy lighting the house on fire for her to care. And apparently she only cares about learning magic and nothing else. In Rudeus' attempt of finding Eris after she ran off, he finds her laying in a haystack like an angel. He tries to wake her up by... well, okay, he just molests her. But fun fact, I guess, Eris is a AA cup with the potential of becoming an E or higher. Great. As he tries to take off her panties, she breaks his ribs and jaw. Good for you, Eris. But Rudeus later puts on some fake tears in an attempt to get Ghislaine to help motivate Eris to learn more than just magic. And in their next writing lesson, Rudeus gets Ghislaine to delve into a story of her past. She was once in a party called Fangs of the Black Wolf, which contains 6 members. 2 swordsmen, a fighter, a thief, a mage, and a cleric. It's not too spoilery to say that some of these members contained were Paul and Ghislaine as the swordsman, Zenith as the cleric, Talhand as the magician, Elenalize as the fighter, and Geese as the thief. They had disbanded about 7 years ago, which lines up with a certain someone's birth. While they were in the party, Ghislaine would rely on the others to deal with money and whatnot, but after they disbanded, she had quite the trouble of doing it on her own. She supposedly went 10 days without food and water and ate monster feces to survive. While Rudeus is disgusted by the story, Eris is completely enthralled, and with that, Eris begs Rudeus to continue the lesson. Seeing Eris and Rudeus practice with the sword, we can see that he's completely on the defensive and lost big time, which is already a stark contrast to what we saw earlier. But I guess on the offensive, Rudeus isn't too bad, but when he's on the defensive, that's when he's sluggish, mostly due to him just kind of being scared. But after their match, Eris slaps Rudeus and calls him pathetic, but Ghislaine interjects and says that it's good for a magician to be like that, and then Eris is like, oh, I mean, of course, it's only natural. But it's at night where Rudeus is preparing for the next day's lesson, and we do get a nice shot of all the figures that he's made here. We have one of Lilia, Zenith, one of Paul, one for Sylphie, and one of Caravaggio. I bet you forgot about him. And one of our beloved goddess, Roxy. Although it's not stated directly, it does seem like some time has passed, and based on the manga and light novel, we'll say that it's been about 2 months since he's arrived, and for some reason Eris started acting up again, and then it hit him. She has had no days off. And so Rudeus decides to give her break similar to the way that our schools are structured. Except I believe in the manga or light novel it's stated I believe she gets 1 day off a week, not 2 like with Western schools. But Eris, Rudeus, and Ghislaine enter the shopping district as Rudeus compliments Eris's attire. She's wearing her regular outfit but now with like a frilly hat and like a mini cloak or something. I don't know what to call it, but just a little thing over top of her torso area. But then she hits him because he complimented her. But we get a little montage of them roaming around the city, and there's a dog. That's honestly kind of crazy, I'm not gonna lie, because that's a regular animal from our world. So I'm partially being sarcastic, but at the same time, it's just a dog. However, I mean, it does appear to be like a different breed just because of the ears, but I mean, yeah, I don't know. What the dog doing? But Rudeus talks to himself as he writes down the prices of the foods he finds, like an apple which costs 1 Asura copper coin. But that's when he got pulled aside by the merchant that offered Rudy an extremely valuable item. And the box reads, by appointment from the Royal Love and Fragrance Suppliers. This is a love potion that allows a man to last over 10 times in a single go, and it'll make a woman drool, open her gates, and be ready to go. And I am not lying to you when I say that this is one of the most important scenes in the series. You could call this like turning point 0.5. This is a big one. You guys got to remember this. I'll know if you forget, but this thing costs 10 Asuran gold coins, and that's a little bit much for Rudeus, but Eris pops up wondering what Rudeus is writing, and he explains, again, that's just, he's writing down the prices of everything that he finds. She wonders why, but he uses an example of tools being sold somewhere else for 5 copper coins, while at this shop they're being sold for only 4. He asks Eris and Ghislaine how much you would make if you were to haggle the prices of these tools here for only 3 copper coins and sell them at another shop for 4. Eris, being the genius that she is, says that she'd make 6 copper coins. But Ghislaine says 1. I mean, Eris just speaks from facts and logic. I mean, it's 6, obviously, but Ghislaine says 1. And as this happens, though, the shopkeep is just like looking at them, going like, what the fuck? Don't do that, please. Like, he's just sitting there like, what, do you want to buy the drugs or not? Like, what do you want, kid? But in a bookstore, Rudeus finds a botanical encyclopedia like the one that he had, and it's sold for 7 gold coins. And for just a refresher on all of this, this is the currency conversion. Basically, if you're Canadian, American, Australian, or use euro, remove 2 zeros to yen, and you get a somewhat accurate conversion to your currency. But that basically means that this is like a $7,000 book. That's kind of insane, and Eris offers to buy him that book using her grandfather's money, but Rudeus teaches her that she should only offer to buy people gifts when she has her own money to spend. Eris becomes kind of unusually quiet at this and accepts it, and to Eris's excitement, Rudeus says that he'll see about getting her an allowance once they get back home. Well, with the sun setting, there is a large shadow that casts from something in the sky, and Rudeus looks up to see a literal flying castle. According to Ghislaine, that is the flying fortress of Perugius, the armored dragon king. And remember, Rudeus had a book about him called The Legend of Perugius, which he thought was a fairy tale at the time, but as it turns out, he's real. Perugius is one of the 3 legendary heroes that beat the demon god Laplace in the previous human-demon war about 400 years ago. Yeah, he's an old dude, Perugius, but according to Eris, Perugius also has 12 servants that fight alongside him. And Ghislaine explains that it is the year 414 of the Armored Dragon calendar, aka K414, and that is the day that marks that when Perugius beat Laplace. So it's been exactly 414 years since Laplace's defeat and the end of the war. But apparently Eris's mood had improved significantly since getting the day off a week. Eris then saved up her money and bought Rudeus the aphrodisiac that he was interested in a few months back. And that costed 10 gold coins, and so that means if Eris did get an allowance of 2 silver coins like Rudeus, it would have taken her about 5 months to save that up, meaning that we should now be near the end of K414. But anyway, Eris asks what the medicine was, and in the scuffle of trying to get Rudeus to spill the beans, the bottle shattered on the ground, and honestly, my heart kind of broke when that happened. Like, Eris for 5 months worked tirelessly to get free money, and it was wasted in an instant. And like, yeah, I get it that it's free money for her, but at the same time, it's like, she didn't buy a thing in the meantime. Actually, thinking about it, she probably did, so it must have been more than 5 months. But I don't know, and then it just gone. But Rudeus had a hell of a time trying to explain what it was to them after a bit of tickle torture, which I guess that's better than actual torture like what Eris would have done maybe 5 months ago, so I mean, hey, her mood's improving a bit. But that is the anime for today. And so pretty exciting stuff, just a lot more Eris fun times, I guess, and math. Really exciting, gotta love math. But anyway, moving on to the manga. And so the manga starts off with Philip and Rudeus talking in a room discussing the kidnapping, and Rudeus goes, "So you're telling me it was none other than Thomas?" Who was that again? And of course it was the butler, whose name in the light novel is Tomas, but in the manga it's Thomas, so I don't know, just a little difference there. But I guess that really isn't the only difference between them, because the manga and anime Tomas is very different. But apparently Tomas had a connection to a perverted noble who had his eyes on Eris. And Eris says that that's shameless. It's disgusting. Meanwhile, he's wishing that he could do the same stuff that the guy wants to do to Eris. And Rudeus isn't really making a good poker face because Philip sees right through him. But thankfully, Tomas has now been replaced by Alphonse. Give a round to our not horrible kidnapping butler. Who knew the bar was like that low? But all while Eris was kidnapped, Soros took out his sadness on Philip to beat him to a pulp. For some reason, I guess. But it's really interesting how Soros and his granddaughter Eris are homicidal maniacs, but Philip kind of turned out okay, or at least on the surface, he's fine. But once Soros calls Eris to make her ask Rudy about teaching magic herself, she jumps into the room like a ball of sunshine and then sees Rudeus. Mood ruined. But then, as Eris asks, she sticks her butt out, grabs her twin tails, licks the top of her lip, and meows for Rudeus. But then, in response to that, Rudeus became the OK Saitama. Because, yeah, that's kind of a natural reaction, I guess. But the longer Eris does it, the more angry she becomes. And as Rudeus puts it, her fury level is at 8, humiliation is at 2, and embarrassment 0. She has the eyes of a predator, all while Soros goes, "Oh, look how cute she is, oh my god." And Rudeus is just thinking like, who the what? But then Phil pipes up as the voice of reason, and then says that she needs to stick her hips out a little bit more like this, and then he strikes the same pose as Eris, and he also he sticks his like thumb to his lip or something, going, God damn it. I don't need to do that. But Rudeus finally realizes that the Boreas family has a beast race fetish, which I get. I'll be honest. I get it. But I guess Ghislaine said that it's good that Rudeus, like, shut that kind of etiquette down. Meaning, that might be a little bit racist, what they're doing. Maybe not might. I think it definitely is a lot racist. But Eris and Rudeus train, and they mention something called a rush stance. But more importantly, it's noted that Ghislaine is the 4th strongest sword god practitioner in the world. And so in my notes, I just straight up list out all the sword god practitioners above Ghislaine, but I'm not going to do that here because why would I? I mean, not that you would know their names, but all what I will say is that there are 2 sword emperors above Ghislaine and then the 1 sword god at the top. There's always only going to be 1 like sword god, water god, north god. There's only ever 1 at a time. But she is king while 2 others are emperor above her. And then obviously the sword god. But according to Rudeus, in the first month of him being at the Boreas estate and Eris's tutor, he's found out 3 things. 1, she's damn good at the sword. And 2, she loves magic and looks like a pyromaniac. And 3, she hates reading, writing, and math. But we do get a couple panels of Sylphie and Roxy, and we see that Sylphie's like being taught dance. Then there's Roxy, who's busy writing late at night. But soon Eris begins acting up again, and that gets Rudeus to conduct a staff meeting between him, Ghislaine, and Edna. Edna being her etiquette teacher. And he requests to have Eris get 1 day off a week. But Ghislaine doesn't know the concept of what a vacation is, and she asks Rudeus about it in a very envious way. But from there, we get a very short, like 2-page version of them going to the town and exploring. But we do see Eris dress up a little bit more compared to in the anime, so that's a plus. She looks adorable. But that is it for the manga. Just a few rearranged and changed up scenes and just a little extra bit at the end. And so now, moving on to the light novel. So the light novel starts out with Rudeus finding out who the perpetrator was of the kidnapping, with them being Thomas. And he thinks about how shameless and evil they are, and if they were to ever do it again, he hopes that they ask him to join. And when Soros finds out that Rudeus didn't get any credit, he lays out Philip, and instead of him taking a knee to explain the situation like he kind of does in the manga, he kind of just lies down on the floor, arms spread as he explains. Father, you don't understand. It's to protect our family's image. But apparently the punch that knocked Philip down was too fast for Rudy to keep up with, meaning that he's faster than Eris, but second, he's kind of just really strong. And on top of that, his yell alone is enough to nearly burst Rudeus's eardrums, and given the fetish for the beast race, it is possible that he learned some of their voice magic to make it so loud. But it's funny how much Eris mimics both Ghislaine and her grandfather down to the little details. The way that she wants the mist to be dropped like Ghislaine, to the loud boom of her voice and the stance of her grandfather. However, at the moment, there's not many traits that she seemed to have picked up from her actual father, though, so poor Philip. But skipping ahead to when Rudeus molests Eris in the stables, we actually get introduced to another character that isn't featured in the anime. The old wise sage. This is the dark representation of Rudeus's inner mind. And he'll be the one pulling the strings for whenever Rudeus wants to do, stuff like this, I guess. But when Rudeus goes to Ghislaine for help, she tells us a little bit about herself on one of the breaks. But apparently Ghislaine was quite a bad kid when she was younger. She'd bully her brother and was just a generally rotten kid. And despite that, her master, who I believe is the sword god. Again, I'm not going to name drop anybody, but I'm pretty sure that was just her master. But he still accepted her, and she talked about her first friends that she made when she was an adventurer and many other stories from when she was younger. And that led her to discussing the fangs of the Black Wolf, the party that she was in, and how she relied on them for buying and selling food, supplies, and necessities, as well as reading maps, contracts, and signs. The party disbanded because of Paul and Zenith having Rudeus, and the reason the party was forced to disband because of those two leaving is because Paul was a great offensive swordsman and Zenith was their only healer. And so we actually get a little bit more detail as to what the exact roles each member had. The warrior, Alenalize, was the tank. The swordsman, Paul, was the secondary tank in DPS. The swordswoman, Ghislaine, was the main DPS. The magician, Talon, is another DPS. The priest, Zenith, is the healer, and the thief, Geese, was their ace. And so I'm calling Geese an ace because a thief is kind of like a general term for someone who did a lot of the little odd jobs and was kind of like a jack of all trades. They don't really excel in any one field, but pretty good all around. Some jobs a thief would do would be to pick locks, set traps, make tents, make deals with merchants, and thieves usually knew how to read well, were sharp, agile, and most of them came from merchant families. Rudeus says that you could probably call them treasure hunters, but Ghislaine retorts and says that a thief is best to describe someone who stole their money and gambled it away. So, I guess, yeah, Geese doesn't really have a good track record when it comes to that. However, apparently their thief, Geese, was able to earn more money than lose it, so I guess he was good at gambling. Lady Luck was on his side. But then Rudeus asks what the difference is between a warrior and a swordsman. But basically, if you were to use a sword and practice the sword god, water god, or north god styles, you are a swordsman. But if you use a sword and use a different style, then you are a warrior. If you use one of those styles, but you don't use a sword, then you're still a warrior. For example, Ghislaine, a sword king, used a secret technique when dealing with the goons called Sword of Light, a technique used only by the sword god style users. Rudeus describes that he couldn't even see Ghislaine unsheath her sword and barely even moved as the guys' heads kind of just fell off. And so remember how last time I talked about how Ghislaine could either have feats at like the speed of sound or light? And originally I thought that it was more like, you know, chances are the speed of sound based. Well, I guess based on the name of the attack and the description of it, I guess the actual anime depiction of the attack was pretty accurate. She was moving so fast that not even color could keep up with her. And if you didn't know, color is basically just light, meaning that she should be traveling slightly faster than light speed. Although it is hard to tell just exactly how fast she is. Unless we were to take how long it took the color to catch up to her and act as though she was perceiving things normally, and we were watching it from her POV. So to her, it only took about like a second and a half for the color to catch up. If that made sense, I really don't know. I need to do more power scaling stuff because I think it's fun, but I need to know what I'm talking about when I talk about it. But anyway, what about a knight? What is a knight? So basically, a knight is kind of just a knight, someone who is appointed as such by a king or a liege lord. They're generally quite educated because they attend good schools, and some could even use magic. However, most of them are nobles, and so they're quite full of pride. But a magic knight or a magic warrior are basically like swordsmen, or just, you know, they use weapons, physical weapons, but can also use magic. Technically, Rudeus would be a mage warrior, but primarily he refers to himself as a magician or a mage. And from there, after that point, Eris attends quite a lot of classes, but whenever she acted up, Ghislaine would explain the importance of being educated because, again, once she was on her own, she started to struggle with the weight of her supplies, with how to start a proper fire, and the inability of using her left hand when holding a torch were all holding her back. There was a day where Eris asked why division was necessary, and Rudeus says that if she ever needed to split up supplies between 5 people evenly, she'd be able to do it with division. In response, she just goes like, but what if I don't want to split it evenly? And, fair enough. Even Rudeus is like, okay, yeah, sure. Well, I guess, yeah, fair logic there. I mean, again, Eris is a genius, after all. However, there is a big difference between just not doing it and being unable to do it. And with Eris's pride-filled head, she just shut up on the spot and continued back with her lesson. But then Ghislaine delved into a story about how she wasn't able to split up the food and supplies well enough, and then she was forced to eat turds and doo-doo. And Eris, who absolutely loved the story, continued to study. And so instead of focusing on Ghislaine and Eris's lessons, we get to take another look at Rudeus and Eris's sword lessons. Apparently Ghislaine was a pretty good teacher, and where Paul would explain where Rudy went wrong, Ghislaine would do the same thing, but also explain how to improve. And so after about 2 months of living there, meaning where we should be in like the summer of K414, Rudeus noticed that he's grown close in skill to Eris, although she is still a little bit better. And Rudeus finds the whole situation to be a lot easier, like training to be a lot easier when you have someone near your level that you can work off against, rather than training with someone that just far surpasses you like Paul or Ghislaine. But the conversation of being an instinctual fighter came up when regards to teaching and swordplay. Paul, being the instinctual type, had a knack for swordsmanship, but since he didn't understand what he was doing himself, he couldn't teach it to anybody else. And so the instinctual types like Paul really aren't good teachers. But that is also how Eris operated. And that's how Ghislaine used to operate before she taught herself how to understand the fundamentals. And that right there is the key to it all. It's mastering the fundamentals that separates a king-tier swordsman to anyone else below. Rudeus is also an instinctual type as well, but that's because of the nature of a magician, and especially being a silent spellcaster himself. But later that day, Rudeus found himself heading to the library, guided by a dog beastfolk woman, and he runs into Hilda, Eris's mother, and he tries to greet her. However, she just snaps her tongue and walks away. Moving on from that, he walks into the library where he finds Philip, who is very excited to see that Rudeus is also interested in books. However, Rudeus says that he's in there to find a grimoire, a spell book, much like what Roxy had. However, the only ones that he could find were extremely valuable and he wasn't allowed to take them out of the library. The one that he, Eris, and Ghislaine have is a bestseller, mainly because it's published by Renoa Magic University. And it's kind of old for Rudeus, right? It's a lot of the beginner tier stuff. He needs something that's a bit more advanced. But we find out that before these magic textbooks were made, people who wanted to learn magic had to go to specific masters that only knew one school of magic. And in the end, they never really learned much. And what's interesting is that the textbook that Rudeus used wasn't really popular until just about 500 years ago. Interestingly enough, that does line up right around the time the Laplace War takes place, so I wonder if there's any connection there. I guess you need magic to fight demons, I guess, so people wanted to learn more. But that also means, a few episodes ago, it might have been episode 1, where Roxy says that humans, like elves, created magic and humans learned about how to use it in the Great Human-Demon War. And before I thought that she was talking about the Laplace War, but based on this, if this book only got popular 500 years ago, that means that would have had to happen more than 500 years ago. Likely then, she was talking about, I believe it's 7,000 years ago when the first Great Human-Demon War happened. That slightly before that time is when the elves discovered magic. And so magic has been around for, I guess you could say 7,000 to 8,000 years, give or take. I'm leaning more towards the 7,000-ish mark, but that's interesting. Long history of magic. But now we get another report on how Eris is doing. Name, Eris B. Greyrat. Occupation, granddaughter of the Fidoa's liege lord. Personality, fierce. Doesn't mind listening to what people have to say. Reading and writing, can write the names of her family members. Arithmetic, subtraction skills are unreliable. Magic, figures she'll tries her best at it. Fencing, sword god style, beginner tier. Etiquette, can do a normal greeting. People she likes, grandfather and Ghislaine. Oh my poof. And so we jump about half a year, which should put us near the end of K414, and Eris starts to act up again, and Rudeus realizes that he wasn't giving her any breaks. And so he called a meeting with the tutors. He, Ghislaine, and Enda Leilun, Eris's etiquette teacher, who didn't live with them and lived out of town. They all came together upon Rudeus's request. Eris's current schedule is sword practice in the morning, free time in the afternoon, and etiquette in the evening. She currently has 6 subjects on the go: language, math, magic, history, swordplay, and etiquette. Her days went like this: breakfast, then studying, then lunch, more studying, snack time, studying, dinner, then free time. And because there was no history teacher, Philip took it upon himself to teach Eris history. And so that made sense given his extreme interest in books. But now with the addition of Rudeus, her last free time in the evening was now filled with more studying. And so to save you from a lot of mumbo jumbo that goes on during the conversation, this is the new plan that was decided upon for Eris' schedule. But quickly, the people of this world did have days and months, but not weeks. And so there was no such thing as a Sunday, for example. But because of our weeks and the fact that the number 7 is important in this world, he chose to have Eris have 1 free day off every 7 days, and each month she'd have 18 classes over the span of 6 days. Her weekly schedule looked like this: etiquette, 5 periods, swordplay, 6 periods, reading and writing, 2 periods, arithmetic, 2 periods, and magic, 3 periods. And Rudeus announced that there would be a teacher's meeting at the start of every month. And now we skip ahead to Rudeus's first day off. He'd be able to roam the city alone and explore. Or so he thought. Waiting at the gate of the manor was Eris and Ghislaine. Eris was annoyed that, unlike her, Rudeus could kind of just go anywhere he wanted to. And she was ready to hit him, but she decided not to. How kind. And so Rudeus allowed Eris to join him, and so excited, Eris ran back inside, calling for Alphonse, and came back out all dressed up. They then headed for the city streets, and despite Roa being considered one of the biggest cities in Fidoa, it wasn't actually that physically big. You could walk the perimeter of it in just about 2 hours, and he finds that the walls are far too big to have been built by normal people, and were probably built or aided by titans, king or emperor tier magicians. But as they walk through the stalls, Rudeus writes down how much each item costs, which when he notes, he writes it in Japanese. And they all make their way to the bookstore, where Rudeus finds a book called Sieges Summoning Magic, and it's worth 10 gold coins. The most expensive book there was called Ceremonies of Asura's Royal Palace's Imperial Court. It sounds just fascinating, doesn't it? But compared to where in the anime, Rudeus mentions that Eris kind of deserves like 1 Asuran silver coin a month, he says that she deserves maybe 1 gold coin a month here. But after that, Rudeus sees the castle in the sky, and they make their way back to the manor, where Rudeus asks Philip if he knows more about it. Philip got one of his butlers to retrieve a book, The Legend of Perugius, which was the same book that Paul owned, and so the book is summarized like this. The armored dragon King Perugius. No one knew where he was born or raised. The oldest record of him came from his younger days before he was famous, when the dragon god Urupen dragged him along to the Adventurers Guild. He showed such strength that in no time the dragon god Urupen, the North god Kalman, and the twin emperors Megas and Gumis formed a party with him. They crushed every opponent they faced. Thanks in part to his brotherly bond with Urupen, Perugius was written into history as the Armored Dragon and as one of the 5 dragon commanders of the Dragon God. He displayed the magnificence of his power in battle against Laplace. Perugius made use of his great strength, summoning magic, to call forth 12 familiars: Void, Dark, Bright, Surge, Life, Violent, Earthquake, Time, Roaring, Thunder, Destruction, Insight, Insanity, and Atonement. These were the aliases of the strongest familiars, the ones that he manipulated. With them, Perugius restored the old floating fortress, Chaos Breaker, and headed into the final battle against Laplace. Yet, all that power was not enough to completely destroy the demon god, forcing Perugius to settle for sealing him away instead. Still, the strength and imposing appearance of Chaos Breaker in the sky was enough for people to call him the Armored Dragon King. The Kingdom of Asura praised him for his achievements, and with the end of the war proclaimed the start of a new era. This was the current era, the Armored Dragon era. The Armored Dragon King Perugius did not rule or reign over anything. He simply hovered over the world in his floating fortress, Chaos Breaker. No one knew his true intentions. So that was a lot, but that's cool, a lot of lore. But with that, their day off came to an end, and the next day, Eris was in just a foul mood. Probably because she got the first taste of freedom in months, and then she was instantly put back into captivity. But she demands for Eris to take her out again, to which he agrees to, obviously, and then she kind of just sits back down quietly and asks him to start the lesson. He notes that Eris seemed oddly motivated to learn today, and so he asks her about it, and to his surprise she said that it's because if she didn't behave, he probably wouldn't take her out again. Which, it's funny because he never said that. She kind of just put that rule on for herself. I mean, she's probably right, but still, it's funny how she gave herself that own rule. But hey, that means that she's actually learning quite a bit, I guess. And so, to wrap things up right on topic, we have Eris's current summary, the final one for the episode. Name: Eris B. Greyrat. Occupation: granddaughter of Fidoa's liege lord. Personality: a little violent. Does listen to what people have to say. Reading and writing: quite adept at reading. Arithmetic: can subtract higher numbers. Magic: studying the basics. Fencing: sword god style, beginner tier. Etiquette: can do a normal greeting. People she likes: grandfather and Ghislaine. So hooray, we are at the end of episode 6, at the end of the manga discussion for today, and the end of the light novel. Just generally, again, more information about what happens, just more detailed scenes. We know about Edna now, and we get a bunch of lore about Perugius, which is definitely helpful for the future. And so it's really nice, again, we just get more depth to Eris's character as well, and so I just really like what the light novel adds compared to the manga and anime. But if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and subscribe for more Mushoku Tensei content, because I am ready for Season 2, and I hope you are too, and I hope you join me on this journey. And so with that, goodbye.